Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm probably going to run over my normal format of 15 to 20 minutes for a video because I'm going to rant. And the reason why I'm going to rant is because I'm going to talk about history and storytelling. Quite specifically the storytelling within comics, but I'm going to talk about history and storytelling. Now, a few things right up front. I'm not talking solely about the history of the comics themselves, nor the history of the characters themselves, although that is certainly included. I'm talking about history more generally, and how current storytellers just ignore not only the history of the characters and the brand themselves, but they ignore history itself as well within their quote-unquote storytelling. And there's two reasons why this sort of ticks me off. Number one, my first degree was in history, and my first academic job was in research. And so I love history. I love the story element of history, and I actually am really good at research. And the reason for that is because I would always think to myself, well, I want to know the answer to this question, but instead of reinventing the wheel, all I need to do is do some research to find out what the answer to this question is, typically. And what I'm going to talk about here is how any quote-unquote story that has a progressive agenda at its heart is indeed not a story. And more than that, is an affront to storytelling itself, especially within these comics that we see today. So I said there were two reasons. The second reason is that this was staring me in the face for the longest time, and I just didn't see it. And that's on me. That's my fault right there for not having seen this sooner. And I'm a little bit ticked off with myself for not having seen this element before. So the thing is that when I started to look at new comics about a year and a half ago and really look at them in an in-depth way, what I thought to myself was, well, these people are just bad writers. They're writing fantasy, but it's bad fantasy writing, and that's all that it is. That's what I thought it was at first. And then I ran across characters like Kate Bishop's Hawkeye. Now, I hate this character, and I've done a number of videos why I explained why this is an awful character. And part of the reason why is because not only Kate Bishop's Hawkeye, but the real Hawkeye, Clint Barton, neither of those people have superpowers. All right, and so when they do things within the Marvel Universe, they're just normal people. And so they should react in a way that's according to normal people rules. Highly trained normal people rules, but normal people rules. And Kate Bishop certainly does not. The old Clint Barton Hawkeye did, but not this new version. This watered down, wimpy version of Clint Barton, he doesn't. And Kate Bishop certainly does not. The normal rules of being a human being do not apply to her. And I said to myself, well, they're just writing a Mary Sue. And yes, the writers certainly are writing a Mary Sue when they handle this character. And I've gone over that in a couple of videos. But it's not only that either. What it is a clear disregard for history. And this came into clear view for me when two books came out fairly recently. And I picked them up. And these two books were Conan books. Now, if you've listened to my videos or read my 10-second comic reviews, you probably know that I'm a big Conan fan. So I bought both of these books. The first one was Age of Conan, Valeria, #1. And the other one was a one-shot, which is Conan the Barbarian, Exodus. Now, Valeria, when I reviewed it, I said it was not a recommend at all. And when I reviewed Conan Exodus, I said it's a soft recommend because for the most part it's good, but there's one scene in it that really ticks me off. And I'm going to go over that scene and the scene from Valeria that really ticked me off as well, because the whole thing was just bad. And I'll try to use those to explain what I'm going to talk about. So I should give you some art from this in the background so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Within the Valeria story, you had Valeria, and she was going to a blacksmith's. Now, this blacksmith shop didn't look anything like a blacksmith's that I've ever seen, but we'll just leave that be. So, when she got into the blacksmith's, you had the blacksmith's son, and he was working on a sword, which was red hot. And this son was about, I would say, 25 years old, and he had immaculate skin. You could probably see it in the art in the background. Okay? He had no cuts, no scars, no burns, no nothing. And how do I know all this? Well, I know all this because the only thing this blacksmith was wearing was a pair of shorts. Now, he had a red-hot sword in his hand. If you have a red-hot sword in your hand, Typically, you're beating it against an anvil, and you would need a blast furnace in order to get it that hot. And when you do those things, you can't be wearing a pair of shorts. It's just ridiculous. It's idiotic. And the whole thing is that it would not take anybody any amount of time, especially today when we live in the information age, to find out what a blacksmith shop looks like and what a blacksmith would have to wear in order to do his job. I mean, I live in a place where blacksmith shops are in people's recent memory. Honestly, it wouldn't take that much research to find out what and how to put this scene into a book. Now, I don't know if it was simply the storyteller or the artist that created this scene. I would say it was a combination of both, but it's a ridiculous scene. Now, to move on to Conan Exodus. It was a fairly good story. It was young Conan coming out of Samaria, and he's following these mountains downwards to civilization. And as he's going through the mountains, he encounters a whole lot of animals that try to kill him. Now, the first group of animals was a pack of wolves, and he dealt with them fairly well. It was a fairly well-written story, although the only thing he had to fend them off with was a pointed stick. And I'm not calling it a spear because it wasn't straight in any way. It was a pointed stick. And if you know anything about wolves, well, he handled it fairly well. They're pack animals. You deal with them in a specific way. The second one that he came in contact with was a mountain lion. And again, you deal with mountain lions in a specific way. And it sort of alluded to this because he scared the mountain lion off. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to make yourself look really big, and you're supposed to make a lot of noise. And this, it seems, is what he did. And he scared the mountain lion off. But the third scene, the bear scene, this is the one that ticked me off. So again, the scene, I'll give it to you in the background. The scene is Conan. He's in the water, and he sees a bear coming at him from the other side of the water. Now, Conan has plenty of time to get out of the way and to get away from this bear, but he doesn't. He decides to attack this bear with his pointed stick and what he has with him now, which is a dagger. It's not a short sword, it's a dagger. And what he does is, when the bear is in the water, he throws this pointed stick at the bear, and he pierces its hide so much that he makes it bleed. And then he decides to attack the bear with nothing but a dagger. Now, I'm sorry, but Conan is just a person. He may be a very strong person, but he is not a superhero. He has no superpowers. A person, no matter how strong they are, with a dagger, is not going to be able to defeat a bear with a dagger. And all you have to do to know this is to do some simple research. He's going to be torn to shreds. I mean, again, all you got to do is do some simple research. Look up what Stone Age people did when they had to hunt bears, and how dangerous it was, and how to kill a bear. And besides the fact that you're looking at this scene and what it looks to be mid to late summer, and in mid to late summer, if you know anything about the life cycle of a bear, they're packing on the pounds. The only thing you're going to hit with a dagger is blubber. That's it. And a lot of people might say to themselves, well, Conan could have got under his jaw and shoved it up into his brain and therefore killed the bear. Well, I'm sorry. You get that close to a bear when you're attacking him, you're nothing but a stain on the forest floor. That's all that's going to come out of that. And again, someone might say, well, there was probably this epic battle scene where he killed the bear in some unique way. Well, if there was an epic battle scene, it should have been put on the page, but it wasn't. It had Conan attacking the bear, and then it had the bear dead. There was nothing in between. This is a ridiculous scene. Again, I'm saying this as a Conan fan. I don't care how strong Conan is. If he tries to attack a bear midsummer with a dagger, he's dead. And my point with all this is that all you would have to do to figure out how to play out these scenes is to do a little bit of research. That's it. But these types of people do none of that. These types of people have no clue how to actually either research anything or to look into history, whether it be of the character or the simple actions that they are portraying within their stories themselves. Because they think to themselves, I'm writing fantasy, therefore I can make everything up. And I do mean everything. And that's what they do. They make everything up. And it's just ridiculous. And it makes it, at its heart, not a story. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. So, for a minute to talk about the way that these people write. Now, I would say that most of these quote-unquote progressive people write in a very specific way, and that it's not some grand conspiracy that they have to write this way. They most probably do not understand the way that they are writing and how ridiculous it is. Some of them do, but most of them, I would say, do not. They are just so indoctrinated into their progressive ideology that they think this is the way that actual reality works. And I want to go into that for just a second. Because typically, when you meet someone who calls themselves a progressive, 95% of the time, you're going to meet one of two kinds of people. The first kind would be your hard socialist, and they would think that this progression is leading to your socialist utopia. Now, just for a second, what is the word utopia? Where does it come from? The word utopia is an ancient Greek word. It means nowhere, no place. That is to say, you will not find this place upon the earth anywhere. And if that doesn't give you a hint about the fact that you're never going to be able to build a social utopia, then perhaps you should look at something simple like history. Now, the traditional way that history fit in to your core subjects was that it was supposed to proceed rationally and logically. You were supposed to use it for rational and logical means. That is to say, rationally and logically, the only things that are going to happen in the future are things that have happened in the past. Those are the only things that you can positively say are going to happen in the future. Anything that you come up with that is going to happen in the future that has never happened in the past cannot be rationally and logically proved to have happened, and therefore is simply fantasy. Now, I realize that with the advances in technology, we can now do things that we have never been able to do before. That's why you would separate science fiction from fantasy, in my estimation. But the thing is that they're dealing mostly with people and human interaction and how humans act and how and what kind of societies that humans will build. And that would all depend on human beings. And this is the key. Because in normal history, in traditional history, you said human beings are fixed things. They have a fixed nature. They're going to act in a fixed way. Therefore, if you want to see how human beings react to these situations, look at the past. You will be able to predict the future, and hopefully you will be able to pick out the mistakes that they made in the past and not repeat them. And so you will get through the future with a modicum of ease. This is what history is supposed to be. But of course, as I have said in a number of my videos, these socialist-minded people, they have to get rid of the idea of human nature itself. And I'll get back to that in a minute, because I said there was two types of people that you would normally come in contact with. And the second type of person is the person who would just say that there is no end to this progress. You will simply progress continually. And it's simply progression for the sake of progression. That's what their progressive thought just boils down to when you question them. And that kind of thought is, again, a denial of human nature. It is saying that human beings are really nothing fixed at all. They have no fixed nature whatsoever, and they can change and become anything that they want to become within the future. And this is a statement, again, saying that it is simply the outside forces that shape who you are. There is nothing internal that makes you human. There is no such thing as human nature. Because at its heart, it's saying that humans are completely malleable, that you can change them and bend them and shape them into anything. And if you can shape them into anything, there can be no fixed points that get in the way of changing them into anything. Because if there are fixed points, it inhibits that change, and there are limitations. And at the same time, it leads to a mindset that reality doesn't actually exist. Why? Because if reality actually exists, that reality would impose itself upon human beings and therefore set limitations for your human progress and your human development. And since they can't abide any kind of limitations like that, because they say that progress will be continual and you can shape mankind into whatever you want, therefore reality cannot impede that progress. Therefore, it does not impose itself upon human beings and cause a de facto human nature, because again, if it did, it would be against the entire basis of their thought. Therefore, reality can't impose itself upon human beings. Therefore, the only way that you can get rid of that imposition of reality upon human beings is to disregard reality itself. Now, if I made this argument 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, a lot of academics would probably have said, well, that's a slippery slope. There's no way it's going to come to that. There's no way these people actually believe that. But if you look around you in the world today, you will see that, yes, this is exactly the end point, and this is where they are all driving to with their progressive mindset. You know, you can say, I'm a butterfly, and people are supposed to take you seriously. You can say, no, I'm not a human being. I'm a 8-legged spirit unicorn. And people are supposed to respect your interpretation of your existence within reality. And it's gone so far that now some governments are changing official documentation for people to say, you are this instead of that. You want to declare that you are a different age than you actually are in years? You can do that. This is a clear denial, not just of human nature, but that reality exists in any independent way at all. And just as a quick side note, what does that do? Well, that destroys reason and logic altogether. Because, again, logic is simply applying the rules of reason to reason itself. And the most fundamental point of logic, the base law of logic, is a thing is what it is. And if you get rid of that fundamental basis, then you're getting rid of all logic. You're getting rid of all reason. And that's why these people in their ideology focus solely on emotion. Because in order to get to their so-called utopia that they want to progress to, or to have this continual progression that they want to have, you have to deny the fact that there is any human nature. You have to deny there's any fixed points within being human, or that reality can shape fixed points within human beings so that they have limitations. So this denial of reality itself is the rational and logical outcome of their thinking. Now, what does this all have to do with storytelling? Well, let's go back to the traditional definition of what a story is. Again, that I would say has continued with Western civilization for the last 3,000 years. It was set down by Aristotle in the 400s BC, and he was working off of stories that preceded him for at least 800 years. And it continued on from his stated definition through most of Western civilization until recently. Aristotle laid down the fact that fundamentally a story is a representation of reality. That is to say, a representation of reality. And he went on to say that the closer your representation of reality is, then the better your story is. Now, you can have fictional or fantastical or science fictional elements within your story, but you still need to have that fundamental basis of a representation of reality and put that other stuff as an additional layer on top of it. But the focal point is that stories, at their heart, are a representation of reality. And so if a story is a representation of reality, and at the fundamental basis of a progressive mindset is the denial that reality actually exists, then in the mind of these people, there is nothing to represent. You don't represent something that doesn't actually exist. And if you do represent anything, it's only in an ephemeral way, in a way that's just here today and gone tomorrow. And again, I would say that the majority of these writers don't really understand that this is what they are doing. They've just been so indoctrinated into this progressive mindset that they automatically do it. Now, I did come across one Marvel writer who specifically knew that this was what she was doing and stated so. I did a video on it. It was Marika Tamaki. I'll actually link that video at the end of this video so that you can listen to what she has to say. But in her statements, she was saying that human beings are fundamentally nothing. She makes that statement. Human beings are nothing. All that human beings are play actors. That's all you are. She says that as a human being, you simply see other things around you. You see other people acting out their lives, and you take those things that you see and you internalize them so that you become a curator of those things within your own mind. And then when the time comes within your life, you take those curated pieces that you have seen and you take those lines and act them out for the people around you. And all human existence is simply this play acting. There is nothing else, because you're fundamentally nothing. All you're doing is play acting things that you have already seen, imitating and play acting all of this stuff that is around you. So the question becomes, if you have at your fundamental basis of your story a progressive mindset, and a progressive mindset denies that reality actually exists, and a story is a representation of reality, and therefore what you are writing cannot actually be classified as a story, then what in the world are these people doing? Well, it's fairly simple what these people are doing. They are trying to take a couple of accidents that are within storytelling itself. That is to say, a couple of things that are just off to the side of storytelling that don't actually have to do with this fundamental basis. They're trying to take those accidents and they're going to write using and employing those accidents to make their stuff look like a story and therefore present it as a story. And what are those accidents that they focus on in their writing? Well, those accidents are 1, emotion, and 2, trying to teach you something. Because again, let's go back to Aristotle. When he said that a story is a representation of reality, what did he say was the function of a story? Well, he said the function of a story is to represent reality because we as human beings, our nature is to be imitative learners. And we are taking this imitation of reality and we are learning something from it. And the reason why we go to it and not only want to learn from these stories, but actually love these stories is is because the fundamental basis of our learning when we were little children was this imitative learning. And so it's hearkening back to this little kid way of learning. And so not only are we learning something, but we are doing it in a fun way with this representation of reality. And this fulfills this childlike wonder way of learning with this imitative learning. So what these progressive writers are trying to do is they're trying to preserve that learning aspect and that emotional aspect and use those two things. Because again, their entire ideology is based upon a denial of reason and logic. Therefore, they can only sell you things through emotion. And as I went over in a number of videos, what they're trying to do fundamentally is to teach you how to act. Because again, to teach you how to act will be to shape how you create yourself, because everything is shaped by the institutions around you, because you have no human nature. And so the way to shape you, the way to change you, the way to progress you is through learning. So a couple of things about that. Number one, I would admit that storytelling is very emotional and can be used very emotionally. There's no problem with that. But at its fundamental basis, if it is not a representation of reality, which itself is a basis of reason and logic, then it is not a story. Number two, I could give you a plethora of examples that these people are trying to teach you something. Just two quick examples. You have Sana Amanat saying that these superheroes and these superhero stories that they are producing at Marvel, they are to teach young people by, in her words, pushing positive ideas. You had Court Lane, another VP over at Marvel, the VP of family content for Marvel that works with Disney. And he went on an interview and said that he thought that he would be fulfilled in his job and that his entire job would be done when he presents this story to these young girls, because they are dealing with a test audience of young girls, that when this audience of young girls reflected back to him the ideas that were presented in the story itself. So obviously, they are trying to teach you something. And obviously, they are using emotion and nothing but emotion. And the key thing that brought this up to me, that finally shoved this idea in my face and got me to recognize it, is the fact that these writers simply treat everything as fantasy. Therefore, they can just make up what a blacksmith shop looks like. They can just make up how a blacksmith is actually supposed to dress or do his work. They can just make up the fact that a human being is stronger than a bear. They can just make up all of these things about how humans actually exist and ignore their limitations altogether. Everything to them is fantasy. They don't have to do any research. They don't have to follow any kind of history, whether it's from the comics or the characters themselves or history itself. They don't have to follow any of that. All they have to do is make crap up. And that's how they write stories. They make everything up. And they make this stuff up in order to teach you something emotionally. And again, if we look at what they're writing and say, this is not a story, because a story is supposed to be a representation of reality at its heart. And at the heart of what you are writing is the denial that reality actually exists. Therefore, what you are writing is not a story. Then what is it? Well, it is a way to emotionally teach you something. And again, I'll go back to that late 1930s, early 1940s definition of what they are doing. What this is propaganda. That is the complete definition of what it is, to try to teach you something in a way that gets around your rational mind. Of course, they get around your rational mind by only using emotion and having the entire center of the book destroy reality, which destroys logic and reason. It is not storytelling. Any story that has a progressive ideology as the fundamental basis of what it is setting out as a scene, it is not a story. It is propaganda. And I was trying to think to myself of a very succinct way to describe the writing of these people. And although I kept on trying to be very specific with how to define it, one word kept flowing through my mind. Soulless. So, if you've gotten this far into my video, thank you for listening to me rant. If I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.